Legislators are looking at new measures to protect teenagers caught in sex trafficking rings, but immunity from prosecution is off the table. House leaders are tweaking their proposal for how to pay for $1 billion in transportation needs. Will the changes satisfy disgruntled local officials? And there are big developments today in the ongoing battle about whether gay marriage should become the law of the land. Lawmakers starts right now. Good evening and welcome to Lawmakers. It's day 12 of the legislative session. We already had a full plate of topics lined up for tonight, but we want to address some late-breaking news concerning same-sex marriage, the U.S. Supreme Court, and our next-door neighbors in Alabama. We'll get to that in just a moment. But first, Pat St. Clair is down at the Capitol and brings us up to speed with tonight's report. Hello, Pat.
Hi, Bill. Well, you could say the billion-dollar transportation bill is having a little bit of plastic surgery. And lawmakers are hoping that once they're done, it will look better but still be recognizable. Some slight tweaks, a few nips and tucks, and the transportation bill made it out of subcommittee after a hearing today.
All those in favor of moving this bill on to the full committee with a due pass recommendation, let it be known by saying yes. Yes. All those opposed say no. No. Yeses have it. So, Mr. Chairman, we'll move you on to full committee.
The bill's sponsor, Representative Jay Roberts, agreed to make some changes after local officials worried the state would take money from counties, forcing them to raise taxes. Roberts explained under the amended proposal, counties will be able to charge up to 6 cents per gallon on top of the state's 29.2 cents per gallon fuel excise tax.
One of the changes that's in this section is probably one of the bigger changes is in the first bill we had where there could be 3 cents by city, 3 cents by county, and then an additional 3 cents by each one by a referendum. That is now taken back to just 6 cents. And then those funds are distributed back within that county.
Counties want the flexibility to use the tax money as they see fit, but Roberts says any money collected from taxes on fuel should be used for transportation. Roberts also said the $5,000 tax credit for electric vehicles would be eliminated under this bill. The full Transportation Committee is expected to get the bill when it meets next Thursday. Ever since the tragic injury of a toddler last year during a police raid in Habersham County, there's been a move to restrict the use of no-knock search warrants in Georgia. Today, a House subcommittee approved HB 56, which is the House's version of addressing the problem.
Of a felony.
Representative Kevin Tanner, the bill's sponsor, says one key element would limit the time most no-knock warrants can be served.
And it starts there. They cannot execute a search warrant with a no-knock between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. except when the judge for good cause expressly authorizes execution at another time.
The bill also requires more training for officers involved in no-knock searches and that experienced supervisors be on duty. While law enforcement officials support the law, some critics say the law goes too far.
House Bill 56 is the largest expansion of government that is being contemplated in the Georgia Assembly this year. I recognize that may sound shocking, but as of now, the word no-knock warrant does not exist in the official code of Georgia.
While several others say it's not enough.
Why are we bothering with this law if it doesn't have any teeth? So I want something that's real, and I want something that protects the police as well as the citizens. This is a start, but we're nowhere near there yet.
Attorney Mauli Davis represents the family of the toddler in Habersham County who was badly hurt by a stun grenade. Davis says the bill needs more safeguards for innocent victims.
There should be some kind of affirmation or swearing by law enforcement that children and or seniors, those vulnerable citizens that we need to protect, are not present in the home.
As we said, this House subcommittee sent the bill to the full committee for debate. Meanwhile, the Senate has its own version of the bill, which is sponsored by Senator Vincent Fort, which his supporters say is a stronger bill. We will, of course, continue to follow both of those bills. And finally, tonight, the other big story. Here is the governor's education plan and his proposal for the state takeover of failing schools in Georgia. But Democrats are asking, what is a failing school and how is that decided? They say as many as 150 schools could be considered failing, depending on the criteria. They want to know how long the schools would be under state control. And of course, everyone is wondering, how will this plan be paid for? The talks are continuing, and we do expect to see a revised plan from the governor on Monday, which should address a lot of those questions. We will keep you posted. Bill, back to you.
Pat, thank you so much. And you're going to stay right there because we're going to invite you to take part in our conversation as we move forward tonight. Also joining me, Loretta Lepore, Republican activist and a media specialist, and Tharon Johnson, Democratic political consultant. He's also the managing director of national government affairs at McKenna, Long, and Aldridge. Jim Galloway is under the weather tonight and is taking the evening off, and it is well-deserved, I guarantee that. So let's start, panel, by looking at the kind of remarkable developments that have occurred over the last couple of days, starting in Alabama. And if you don't mind, let me just kind of lay it out for everybody. A federal judge in Alabama overturned Alabama's ban on gay marriage. Supreme Court Justice Roy Moore, the same man who refused federal order to remove 10 commandments from the courthouse, said to judges in his state, I don't care what the federal court has said, do not marry gay couples. Organizations went to the U.S. Supreme Court this morning and said, we are asking you to nullify Judge Moore's order to those local judges. And the Supreme Court said that they have got to marry gay couples. Now, subsequent to that, Justice Clarence Thomas issued a statement. By the way, the ruling on that was 7-2 in favor of gay marriages proceeding in Alabama. Clarence Thomas issued a statement saying, rather angrily, I think the court is tipping its hand. This means we're on the verge of approving gay marriage, of saying gay marriage is constitutional. Tharon Johnson, this seems like a remarkable chain of events in just a couple of days.
Absolutely. And it looks like Judge Moore is sort of fighting this sort of national tide that's going on across the country, where we now currently have 37 states that are basically allowing LGBT members and gay people to marry. But what's very interesting about this particular decision is that this judge basically told probate judges that if you follow this federal ruling, that you basically would be personally liable. And so I think it's not really good for the state of Alabama, and it's definitely not good as we try to move forward and to make sure that these folks have the opportunity to get married.
So we expect, by the way, the U.S. Supreme Court is going to, we should hear from them by the end of their session on whether they, in fact, are going to do what Clarence Thomas suggested, and that's approve gay marriage, call it constitutional across the country. Georgia's had a couple of suits. We have a ban on gay marriage passed by voters here. Loretta, what are the consequences of this if the Supreme Court rules that gay marriage is legal? Do you see social ramifications? What's going to happen? What's this all going to mean?
Well, I don't know about social ramifications. I don't know there will be outrage as we saw, back in the 60s and at that level. I think this has been more of a slow evolution, and it's somewhat generational, the shift as well, as we see, younger folks, the millennial generation, they're going to the polls. These issues, they have a more libertarian bent on some of the social issues where it's kind of government hands off, live and let live. It will be interesting to see. I think the court's going to rule in June, take up the Supreme Court's going to take up the issue in June. And Justice Scalia was also a dissenting opinion today, which is not unexpected.
Scalia and Clarence Thomas.
Right, and they're pretty adamant that just today, their decision today, the court's decision today, does not necessarily signal a bellwether. Though I think if you look at where the general public is and where sentiment is, when Tharon referenced 37 states now. There's a tide. There is a definite shift in public sentiment on this issue.
Pat, You have talked in the past to gay couples, gay individuals, about their feelings about this. And I think you've indicated that some of the people you've talked to in your past conversations have actually said they would move out of the state to get married in another state that has gay marriage as a legal commitment, yes?
Yes, that's true. It was actually about 1.5 years ago when the Defense of Marriage Act was struck down by the Supreme Court, and we talked to several same-sex couples, and they were ecstatic, thinking that that would mean that here in Georgia, they were on the right track as far as getting same-sex marriage approved. But it is a slow roll, and many of those couples that I followed up with said that they just can't wait. They want the legality of marriage, and they want it now, and they're willing to move out of state to get it.
So it's interesting, Pat, Tharon, I throw this out to one of you first. In fact, Tharon, let me start with you. This movement toward gay marriage, and we don't know, look, we have no idea what the Supreme Court is going to do, but the trend does seem to suggest we may see gay marriage legalized. Certainly with all the states that have already got gay marriage, Alabama now added to that. All of this happening at the same time, we have a religious liberty bill that's a subject of enormous controversy because critics say it's there so that private businesses can deny service to gays, that sort of thing. Ironic?
Well, I think that it is ironic, but I think also it's something that we should really pay attention to, because if you look at it, I mean, the images in Alabama, I mean, you have couples that are camping out overnight to be the first couple to get married in Alabama. And so we're talking about human beings who want to basically marry their loved ones. But what's interesting here in Georgia, and we've talked about this a lot on this show, is will this ignite sort of the LGBT community to pay a little bit more close attention to this religious freedom bill? Because the biggest complaint about that bill is making sure that it doesn't discriminate on individuals because of their sexual orientation. But the other thing that's so unique about this is that, you know, we're 50 years ago in Alabama, I mean, we were fighting for voting rights and fighting for civil rights. And so now, you know, you're fighting for gay rights in this particular state. But I think people are watching very closely what's happening in Alabama, and you're going to see that trend throughout the South, not only in states like Georgia, but other states like Tennessee. And I think they're set to, you know, have their rulings happen.
Yeah, Tharon, Pat, Tharon says what a lot of gay individuals and organizations have said for years, which is that gay rights, gay marriage is as much a civil rights issue as any of the things that were being fought for across the South 50 and more years ago. So there is a certain irony or certainly coincidence of timing that Alabama now is going to have to accept gay marriage 50 years after the march from Selma to Montgomery.
Absolutely. Yes, it is, like you said, kind of a strange irony. And, you know, we still have the religious community at loggerheads on one side or the other. They're not all aligned on this religious freedoms bill. So it's something we're keeping a very close watch on.
Loretta, you know, to go back to the religious liberty bill, that Sam Teasley, the sponsor of the main bill, Josh McCoon, who's been tinkering with a bill, have said all along, look, this is not an attempt to discriminate. Actually, Sam Teasley got some compliments from a Macon DA who had been very critical of the legislation, fearing that it was going to somehow impose some restrictions on people who, if out of religious purposes, believed in corporal punishment. It stopped gay people from doing business in establishments. Do you think Teasley's trying to move to a place where he can rid himself of all of those allegations, or is that just what it's all about?
Well, he has said from the beginning, as has Josh McCoon, that that's not what this bill is about. But when you look at preceding bills in other states, you know, we can look at Arizona, and that is what that bill was about. And so they're fighting some pre-existing perception about what the bill is as well. And it is my understanding that he has changed quite a few things, Sam Teasley, in his legislation. And I think the LGBT community is very aware and watching very carefully what this legislation does or doesn't do. I think that the issue that Senator McCoon and Representative Teasley have been facing is that they really have to define what the bill is about. Why is that bill needed? If it's not about limiting other folks' rights and it is strictly about their making sure we're ensuring religious liberty, which is covered under the U.S. Constitution, then why else is this needed? Okay,
let's move on, if we can, to another subject that has been getting some attention. Senator Renee Unterman had at 4 o'clock, I think it was this afternoon, moved another step down the road on her bill that would offer some new protections to teenagers caught in sex trafficking rings. Loretta, she initially wanted to have, she called the bill safe harbor.
Right.
And I think that because the intention was, if possible, to have immunity from prosecution for teenagers caught in sex trafficking rings, but she had to throw that provision out.
Right. She had to throw out the provision that related to prostitution. So these young girls that get co-opted into the sex traffic trade, she wanted to also not have them, in essence, have double jeopardy. So not only are they facing this awful life, in slavery, sex slavery, but then they're going to be charged, prosecuted, have a record. How do you get out of this cycle? This is an issue that Senator Unterman has worked on for years and years. It's something that's very close to her heart, and I'm certain that it was probably very difficult for her to let go of that piece. But there are other very important pieces that remain in this piece of legislation that I feel like she may say, okay, so long as I continue to work toward the end goal of getting rid of this problem that has become epidemic in Georgia, not just in Atlanta-centric, but in the surrounding suburbs as well. She's from Gwinnett, one of the highest trafficked areas, in the state. And so you'll see that that folks that get caught with co-opting these girls and bringing them into this line, they will now have to register as sex offenders.
Yeah, and
that's a big step.
Yes, Tharon, I was going to ask you if you want to weigh in on that. The bill shifts the real burden here to sex traffickers themselves. New penalties, as Loretta points out, including confiscation of vehicles that they are using for sex trade, the sale of which, or then a fine that would then be applied to some sort of rehabilitation. Yeah. Is this a good approach?
So Senator Unterman should definitely be commended for this. I mean, as Loretta said, this is something that she's been working on for a very long time. And I think that we've got to put a stop to this human trafficking that's going on in our metropolitan area. What's interesting about the part that's kind of being left out is exactly what you said. I mean, the increase of the fines are good, but the money from these fines will go to these rehabilitation centers, because what people don't talk about is that these young children, these young teenagers, these young women, after they've been victims of human trafficking, the rehabilitation part is just as important, because they've got to go out and they've got to live with these troubling events that have happened to them. And so I think the rehabilitation part of this particular legislation is very important. But I think also you see that Senator Unterman is definitely saying, you know what, this is so important, I'll compromise on this portion of the legislation, which is an important part.
How do you feel about that, about taking away immunity from prosecution? Loretta calls it almost double jeopardy. First, you're the victim of sex trafficking, and then you are at least eligible for prosecution for being a prostitute.
I think you got to look at it as sort of a case-by-case basis, but I agree with Loretta. I think that it is a double jeopardy approach. But again, let's make sure that we're doing everything we can to strengthen this piece of legislation, this law, to prevent human trafficking.
Pat, what's your sense down there about because Prosecuting Attorneys Council was adamantly opposed to the immunity provision, was that the stumbling block as far as you can tell? Will this legislation now have a much easier path toward passage?
As far as we can tell, it is. We tried to talk with the senator today, and she wasn't available. But from past conversations, that was the major objection. And as both guests have said, she is so adamant about getting this through the legislature that she is willing to compromise. And she said at a news conference last week that she'll move in steps if she has to. She's going to do whatever it takes, and she is confident that eventually she's going to have all of those provisions eventually approved by the legislature.
You know, it's interesting that you both have talked about Renee Unterman's passion, because she really has been one of those legislators who it proposes an awful lot of bills that really seem very close to her heart, as you say. Autism, insurance protection for children with autism. Now this bill, she's like Alan Peake, a really passionate person about her issues.
Absolutely. And she's a registered nurse by trade and profession. And prior to these two major issues that we see today. She's always been this way about, healthcare issues, prior to these two issues. She has a way of really compelling others to come around to her way of thinking. And on issues like this, it's not only been good under the Gold Dome, but outside the context of the Gold Dome, she's done a lot to raise awareness within the general community around some of these issues.
Okay, well, we have a lot to go, and we're going to, in a moment, take up the big gulp of this session, which is transportation, the needs the state has, and the money they've got to raise to do it. And we're going to get to that in a moment. So still ahead on Lawmakers hitting political potholes on the road to a transportation bill. We'll have an update on where it stands now. Lawmakers is back in a few moments, but in the meantime, do you know about your lawmaker? To date, Hugh Gillis was the longest-serving member of the Georgia General Assembly. He served 56 years in office, starting in 1941 until his retirement in 2004. First, he was a member of the House and then the Senate. His lawmaking career spanned the governorships of Eugene Talmadge through Sonny Perdue, and from U.S. Presidents Franklin Roosevelt to George Bush. And Hugh Gillis, a fascinating man to get to know down at the state capitol. Welcome back to Lawmakers. I'm Bill Nigut. I said just before the break, do you know about your lawmakers? Most nights on this show, we try to give you just very brief portraits of the very diverse, remarkable group of people who are down there at the state capitol. So if you're listening to us from a legislator's office and you want us to say something about your legislator, why don't you get in touch with us here at GPB, and we'll highlight the work that your legislator is doing. So let's get back to the serious business here tonight. With us, Loretta Lepore. She's a Republican activist and a media specialist. Tharon Johnson, Democratic political consultant. And our own Pat St. Clair joining us live from the state capitol. Thanks for staying with us. Pat, let me come to you first on this, if I might. We had some controversy when the bill that would fund the transportation package, the $1.5 billion that are needed to pay for all of the road work we need. And the biggest problem seemed to be that counties and municipalities were losing their funding. Now, there's a revised version of this which would make it easier for municipalities and counties to come up with money, right?
Yes, there is. And the amended version of the bill was in the subcommittee today, and it was actually passed out of the subcommittee onto the full committee. And basically what it does is, on top of that 29.2 cents per gallon excise tax that is proposed in the bill, there will be an up to 6 cents, additional cents, that counties can charge, and they can use that money to replace what is in effect being taken away from them.
Yeah, but Tharon Johnson, we've talked about this to some extent. When the state appropriates all that money, the legislators can say, well, we didn't raise your taxes, but they put the burden on counties and municipalities. Mm-hmm. Even though the big thing, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that's happened here is they initially said to local municipalities, you can raise the gas tax by 3 cents on your own. Mm-hmm. If you want to raise it an additional 3 cents to get that local revenue, then you've got to go to voters. Now they're saying, if you want 6 cents, you can just do it by action of a commission or a city council, right? Have I got that right?
Yeah. And I don't know if you were going to jump in, Loretta.
Go ahead.
Okay. No, I think what you saw is that these counties and these cities became outraged, and really they're to be commended to really put the pressure on the legislators to really look at this bill and change it. But you're correct. Now, local municipalities and counties have the option to basically do the 6% without a referendum. And so this is something that is going to be really interesting going forward to see how people respond to it.
It's somebody's got to raise taxes. It's not like everybody's off the hook.
Right, and I think one of the compromises that was reached today, so the representatives for the counties thank legislators for having them at the table. The representatives for the cities were there today to testify as well. They didn't have the opportunity the last go around, and so they presented some of what they'd like to see incorporated into the bill. I think the primary difference here is that it was 3 and 3. The counties could do 3, the cities could do 3, and then it went to referendum.
Right.
And now the way that they're doing it is that it's the counties raise 6, and then through a formula, that money is shared. It's a pre-existing formula. It exists already today, will be distributed. The funds will be distributed to the county and the cities. So it's more of a shared pool of funds based on, again, if the voters, again, up for another local option sales tax.
Oh, I thought they took all of the referendum out of the equation. I'm wrong about that.
Well, what happens is with all the local taxes, so all the local, sales tax options, what they did today was extend some of the time periods for those. So some going all the way out to 2020 before they would, and everything that's in place currently gets to stay in place. So no splosts,
right?
None of that is being revoked. They get to run their full course. And then if the county and cities together decide we want to re-up this, we want to put it back to the voters again as a splost, that's in addition, that's different. The voters have to say yay or nay.
But one thing I want to add, though, and I want to be fully disclosed, my firm, we work with DeKalb County, so I want to say that before I make my comment. But, you got to look at DeKalb County, and Micah Jacobs has introduced a bill regarding the host. And in looking at the current bill that just came out of the subcommittee, we really got to ask the question, does it basically decrease the amount of revenue that's generated by the host that the county can benefit from? So I think what you're going to see is that a lot of these counties are going to really start to look at this bill that came out. But I also want to commend the Republican leadership for really moving faster on transportation. I mean, when I was here a week or so ago, I was really pushing for them to move, and also just to really incorporate the local cities and counties. That's something that they should really be commended for.
All right, we are completely out of time. I apologize if I have a few of the details wrong on that revised version of the bill. This is why we need you back as quickly as possible, Jim Galloway, but thanks for your explanation. Loretta Lepore and Tharon Johnson, thank you for being with us tonight, as always. We're going to close the show by going down to Pat St. Clair again. She has a person of interest to share from her beat down at the Gold Dome. Pat, what do you got?
Well, that is absolutely right. We will continue to bring you these stories of interesting people here at the Capitol. And tonight we explore the festive office of Representative Sharon Cooper.
Hello, welcome to my office. I think you'll find it's probably the most unusual office in the Capitol due to my folk art collection, and that you have to hunt to find a picture of me.
While there's only one picture of Representative Cooper in her office, there's a plethora of unique artwork, including several images of George Washington, Washington in buttons, Washington in stamps, and Representative Cooper's favorite.
My favorite probably is George Washington crossing the Delaware with the dogs. And I love the eyes because they look like they're seasick, and with the Dalmatian putting up the flag.
When you walk in here, you're immediately happy.
That's it. Well, and that's really good because in health, we really tackle some really complex issues. Sometimes the discussions get a little heated, and so I think it helps to have an enjoyable atmosphere.
That's Pat St. Clair in the office of Sharon Cooper down at the Capitol. I'm Bill Nigut. This is Lawmakers. Good night.
GPB Original Production.